Good morning. How is everyone? It's good to see you. I miss everyone. We'll have our YouTube video today, and I wanted to talk to you about the SpaceX launch that was supposed to happen yesterday. All right, today is Thursday, and it's the 28th of May, and I'm very excited about it. I was very disappointed when they had to scrub the launch yesterday due to weather. But I wanted to just reminisce for a minute. If you remember, as I do, how exciting all of those launches were back when I was a kid, maybe when you were a kid, we had the space program going on, the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and it's kind of good American stuff if you could use a little bit of a shot in the arm for an apple pie, hot dogs and hamburgers kind of a thing right now. I know it's always feel good stuff to me. So the Apollo mission, of course, was designed to take us to the moon. Gemini was a precursor to that carried two astronauts, and Mercury started off with a capsule, one astronaut. And when I was in elementary school, back in the the mid 1960s to the late 1960s, well, they used to roll this television into the classroom, and you didn't have to, you could put down your pencil for a minute, and it was a big deal to have an entire assembly about watching a space launch. Very American, very 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then of course, the propellant would be aflame, and this thing would start to lift off the ground, and an American astronaut was headed into space. Well, pretty big deal. First of all, I've seen people right in Walmart taking out larger televisions than that one they rolled into that room back all those years ago. But then that was a big TV. I had never seen a TV that large. It was very impressive. And of course, it was all in black and white also. And how far we've come. Now we have a private company, right? SpaceX, which is going to be the first time that not a national government, but an actual private company is going to be putting astronauts into space. And, well, it marks another milestone for us at this point. We haven't had, let's see, I have this just written down here. We haven't launched an astronaut from the United States of America, right, from U.S. soil, since the final space shuttle mission back in 2011. Right, so the space shuttle, as you remember, was more of a reusable device, where the machine, the aircraft, the spacecraft, could be launched into space, and then it would glide back down through the atmosphere and then actually land at some huge runway someplace. And you could refurbish it and reuse it, right? And before, of course, Apollo and all the rest of those things, it was a one-time shot, and then the rest of it, all of the parts that were dispended from it either wound up rolling around in space as space junk, which there must be quite a bit of by now, not by us necessarily alone, but by the Russians, by the Chinese, by the Indians, everyone else who was actually launching rockets. But the SpaceX is always an excellent platform right now because it's completely reusable also, like the space shuttle was. And that's something that's very modern and very exciting. The rocket, the SpaceX rocket, that hopefully we'll get to see launch on Saturday, and this being Thursday, that is going to actually, if it operates as planned, will actually be able to come down and land itself. Very exciting, very cool, very cool. And inside the cockpit, I understand it's like it's like being inside a Tesla. A lot of touch screens, a lot of electronics. The old-fashioned stuff. You go into the cockpit of a capsule, and it's just a myriad of switches and buttons and circuit breakers. So this is all very modern, very exciting stuff. But the United States now is going to be able to bring its own astronauts into space. We had, since the space shuttle was retired, we had been launching astronauts into space on behalf of by the Russians. We would pay the Russians to send our astronauts up. And so it depends on how you feel. From a political standpoint, regrettably, everything is in our country. We have a big argument about, is nationalism a curse or is it something to be proud of? That's not something that's going to be solved right now. But this argument we're having today about this is that, well, after the Cold War was over in 1991, at least the Cold War with the Russians, was what was the need for them to be creating rockets and launching people into space, and us to have our own program to launch rockets and put people into space? Why don't we just, sort of combine some of these efforts, you see? And what happened was that the United States, we just didn't build that stuff anymore. I mean, it is very expensive after all, and it shows now international cooperation. But for me, at least, personally, my own opinion is I happen to be glad that the United States has taken the initiative, along with private industry, to create a program where we could bring people back into space from United States soil and not have to be dependent on other nations to do that. That's just nothing more than my own opinion. Probably a function of my age, going back to what I was just telling you about when I was a kid, and I was excited from the standpoint of, the big USA logo going up into space and saying, well, here's an example of our, what we can do as a nation and our technology. The idea with these SpaceX missions right now is to get Americans back into space. These two astronauts happen to be going to the space station, the International Space Station, and we will eventually go back to the moon. I believe the target date on that was 2024. And then the idea from that was to get to Mars. So right off the top, you would have to ask yourself the question, is this something that we really need to be spending a lot of money on? If you're looking at it from the standpoint of a national deficit or debt, I mean, couldn't we be spending on all of this money on something, I don't know, a little more practical? That's all a discussion for another day, and people can debate it once, in a simpler time. And I'm excited. I like watching the rocket, I wonder also from a global warming standpoint. I mean, there's got to be a lot of exhaust flying into the atmosphere, So we'll see. It depends on policy. If in 2020 elections, I mean, if the Green New Deal, for instance, was to take place, depending on the election going one way, I wonder just personally how that would affect something that would be, from an emission standpoint, from a natural resource standpoint, from an allocation of funds standpoint, how some of these things would change. I wish I could just give you a scientific discussion about rockets, not that I'm a rocket scientist by a long shot, but everything we're doing and everything we're talking about is in the context of a national election coming up, and with very different priorities based on one party to the next or one candidate to the next. So the future of all of these things will be seen. Also, world events. And I wonder what you remember about the space program. I guess it depends on how old you are. If you're around my age or older, you'll remember the seriousness of all of this. It started off, of course, the Russians and us, as a trip to eventually the moon. And this was a prowess of your nation's ability to outdo the other nation, right? Though this is one of the things we say is a negative thing about nationalism, right? I mean, do we all have to go around thumping our chests all the time to show that we're superior? But whether or not that's in human nature or not, I'll leave to more qualified people. But however, we talk about history and from the standpoint of, even ocean liners sitting amongst a number of books, even in this room, having to do with countries that are, vying for the fastest ship across the Atlantic Ocean, the Cunard liners, Queen Mary, and the French Liberté, and of course, the Normandy and the Europa and the Bremen for the Germans. These are all pre-World War II. The Liberté being the Europa after World War II. But the thing is that national governments would give extra money to these companies so that you could carry the flag of the nation. And it was a big point of national pride. A big point of national pride. A lot of money spent, a lot of fuel spent, a lot of pride involved. So whether or not this is a bad thing or a good thing, as I said, I'll leave to other people. Me, I like it. Maybe during this time of quarantine, it brings back a feeling of, like I said before, a little bit of apple pie, a little bit of Americana, something that really can't be assailed as just something that's generally good. Also for the United States, because of the nature of our society and economy, it's a little bit different than some of the other countries that are involved in space exploration or have the technology or the money to put a piece of hardware in space, let alone an astronaut, is that we drive a lot of private enterprise. And private enterprise is our partner in this particular mission in the form of SpaceX. And I think that's very, very important. Being able to have American companies innovate, use their technology, use their prowess, and to develop extraordinary machinery and other things is another thing, unfortunately for us at this time, overlaps into politics too, because you ask the question of whether or not it is good to have private companies, especially very large private companies, who you might imagine would be somewhat profit-driven, to be able to be in competition with other companies to do such things. And the fall-off historically has been some benefit. These things, once any company or any entity gets a certain amount of power, is that going to be exploitative? Or is that going to result in something positive? But this is the free market, free enterprise system, and it is a very, very, very big part of today's discussion regarding this SpaceX mission, because it is a partnership of private enterprise, SpaceX, and also NASA. So good luck to the mission and the astronauts, and Godspeed to all of them. Art Gottlieb, looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.